10 million. That's the number of people in the US who lost their jobs just within a 2-week period at the end of March in 2020. The result is a flood of new people all in the job market at the same time. However,
And for you, this might mean more competition for the available jobs. So, what can you do to stand out? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today.
I'm Annyce Davis, or Brown Girl Dev on Twitter. I work as an engineering director for Meetup. Part of my primary job responsibilities is the recruiting and hiring of engineers.
And I'm Wesnie. I've been an Android developer for 3 years. I'm currently working at iHeartRadio, helping to improve their music application. And trust me, I know a lot about the job search journey.
And together, we're going to walk through each of the primary stages of the hiring funnel. We'll share the goal, best practices, and tips for how you can stand out, starting with your resume.
Then we'll talk about the recruiter phone screen,
The hiring manager phone screen,
the tech phone screen,
and finally the onsite.
To help make this talk more practical, we'll base it on a fictitious job posting for a mid-level engineer. Now, I'm not going to read this word for word, but here's a quick highlight of the overview and a close-up of the requirements. We'll see how the job posting plays a large role in how you structure your resume and conversation. So let's get into it. This posting is for Star Electric, and as you can see, they're looking for a mid-level engineer with familiarity with the newest technologies, and that they've had technical experience as well as experience working with others.
Thanks, Wesnie. The resume review is the first stage of the funnel. Typically, for mid-level engineering positions, you may have to compete with over 200 other applicants. The goal of this stage is to market yourself and get an interview. So how can you do it? First, you want to make sure you include relevant projects and work history. Document the technologies and libraries that you're familiar with, and keep it succinct and metrics focused. Let's look at an example. Here we have the resume of Mary Jones. We'll look at these 3 sections, the objective, the skills, and the experience, to see how we can really help Mary to stand out. And we'll start with the objective. This objective tells the reviewer nothing about Mary that isn't already obvious. Of course, she wants to work full-time as an Android developer. She's already applied for the position. We can do much better. Here's an improved version. Dedicated and experienced Android developer with proven success in developing high-quality user experiences, seeking an opportunity to use my knowledge to collaborate closely with design and backend teams on a meaningful product. Let's highlight why this works. First of all, you're including the fact that you're experienced. Then, in the job requirements, it specifically mentioned that they were looking for someone who could collaborate with design and backend. Check, check. Next, here's the skills section. It's just a long list of expert at this and expert at that. First of all, it goes without saying that you shouldn't lie on your resume. If you're applying for a mid-level position, it's unlikely that you're an expert in everything already. What's more, it puts you in an awkward situation when it comes time to actually verify your expertise, or you get the job and you can't even do the work. So stick with the facts. This is a much better version. It leaves out the proficiency level. That's going to be uncovered as you move throughout the funnel. Second, it's much easier to scan, and you can see that the main job requirements have been met. And third, it takes up less space on the page, so you can use it for more important things like your work experience. Speaking of experience, here's what we have from Mary so far: improving test coverage, contributing to transforming the app, features and bug fixes. It's so boring, and it certainly wouldn't stand out to a reviewer. We need to give more. One of the best ways to structure the bullets in your job experience is to use this formula: I accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z. Let's see an example. We started with this statement in our experience. Instead, we could say, transformed our Android application into a multi module app by introducing dynamic feature modules, which lowered our build times by 35%. Much better. When formulating your bullets and you use words like sustained, formalized, launched, coordinated, those things have power and they can grab the reader's attention. We've updated Mary's resume to include the tips that we've shared. We even added in her GitHub handle and LinkedIn URL. This is the type of resume that is sure to stand out and make it to the next stage of the funnel. So for you, make sure you cover the requirements in the posting. Use action verbs and metrics, and include links to GitHub and your published apps. If you do these things, then you'll be well on your way to the next stage.
The next phase is the recruiter phone screen. It's the initial impression you'll have on the company, and it's important to know how to navigate this first step. The goal of this phase is to show the recruiter that you share the same values and will be a good fit. Before having this interview, it's best to do your research on the company and think about potential questions to ask. You'll also want to make sure you show sincere interest and let the recruiter know about your desired salary. Some examples of research to do during this stage is to look at websites such as Glassdoor to see what it's like to work there. It's also best to Google the latest company news and see information on your interviewee. That way, you have a lot of things to talk about and questions to ask during the interview about the entire company as a whole. Look, it doesn't help anyone for you not to provide your desired salary. The recruiter is looking for someone that meets their range, and you don't want to waste your time over a job that's below your expectations. If you're unsure of where to look for information about salaries for your role and location, consider looking at websites such as levels.fyi, which allows you to easily compare salaries. You'll also want to show sincere interest in the company. You can do that by having your story, which is a prepared story, but don't sound rehearsed, of why you admire the company. Here's an example. From a young age, I have always had a keen interest in music. Even so much that during road trips, I always volunteered to be the car DJ. And to this day, I still enjoy music, and this is why I decided to work at iHeartRadio, to have an inside look of what it's like to share music to the mass population. Some points to help you stand out to the recruiter are to make sure that you've done your research and that you have an interest in the company. You'll want to also make sure that you're up to date with the latest technologies, since you might be questioned on this during this round. It's also important that you're serious about moving forward. The recruiter that you interview with is often working with a specific timeline. Sometimes they'll only have 2 to 3 weeks to fill the position, which is why it's important to not waste your time or theirs. Be ready. You'll also want to demonstrate intellectual curiosity. Talk about a time where you've introduced a new technology or process to your team that had an impact on results. Show that you're a fast learner who could easily grow at the company. An example could be, I initiated working with MVI because I felt that it would be a good software architecture to implement into our code base since it was a mess before. I decided to create a sample project and show it to my manager during our one-on-one and eventually to my teammates. My teammates were so impressed by the simplicity of using MVI that we decided that we would migrate the code base. This change helped us to simplify our code base and improve our productivity.
Thanks, Wesnie. Now let's talk about the hiring manager phone screen. This is my favorite part because this is what I get to do the most often, chatting with candidates in the funnel. The goal of this portion is to start to establish a relationship. As the interviewee, you want to really start building a relationship at this point. Whether it's fair or not, people tend to hire those that they like and they feel can do the job. So establishing a relationship with the hiring manager is super important because they're often the final decision maker. So what can you do? Be prepared for the tell me about yourself. Demonstrate that you can do the job and then effectively tell your story. We're going to look at each of these things in a bit closer detail. Tell me about yourself. It's not just the time to read through your resume. Likely, the hiring manager has already done that. It's the same as convince me what it is about you that makes you the perfect person for this job. This is your personal elevator pitch. You have about 1 to 2 minutes to give an explanation of how you can benefit the team and the organization. So here's an example. This is my personal elevator pitch. I'm a detail oriented, impact focused leader. I thrive in challenging environments and I bring clarity to the ambiguous. I love to share what I learn with others. I use my ability to break complicated things down into smaller pieces so that I can help elevate others not only internal to my company, but externally. And with just a few sentences, I've unveiled what it is that I can bring to an organization. I also mentioned that you want to be able to tell your story. This is your chance to go beyond just being likable. This is your chance to actually talk about each of the job requirements. So you want to be able to go through and help the hiring manager to be able to check all the boxes for you. They don't want to have any red flags so that you can move forward in the process. As an example, if the hiring manager says something like, tell me about the project while you were at ABC Studios. You could say something like, I converted the app from Java to Kotlin. Sure, that's true. Or you could say, oh, yes, ABC Studios, that was a great experience for me. That was the year that Google officially announced that Kotlin was a first class language. I had the opportunity to convert our app from Java to Kotlin. In fact, we were running on both phones and watches at that time. Notice the difference. It's more conversational and it also addresses more of the items in the job requirements. Now, with the basics out of the way, if you really want to stand out, you'll need to do the following: download the app, or at least just check it out on an app store before your interview. Look up the person on LinkedIn, find some common ground that you can talk to them about. And then, if you don't have any questions, it comes across as if you're not really interested in the job. Make sure you come prepared with some questions. Here's a sampling of a few questions that I personally ask whenever I'm interviewing. I'll say something like, well, what's the ideal candidate like for this job? Describe your leadership style for me. What would my day to day responsibilities be? What's the rest of the team like? You learn a lot about the person, and at the same time, it shows that you're really interested in the company.
The tech phone screen is where we get a chance to show up our skill set to someone from the team that you'll be hired for. It usually comes with a challenge in order to gauge your skill set and give an employers of an idea of how you would perform given a task. The goal of this round is to highlight your technical skills and demonstrate how you would perform on the job. You'll either be given an algorithm to solve, a take home coding challenge, or have a live coding session. For either one, you'll need to prepare so that it's easier to get through the roadblocks. To prepare, you'll have to do research on the latest technologies and put them into practice. Also, be ready to discuss your prior projects and work experience. You must also have questions ready to show your interest. My process when preparing for a tech phone screen is visiting websites on guidelines and the latest technologies. I use what I learned to then work on small projects And examples of those things that I might research are things such as Jetpack components, Swift UI, coroutines, Work Manager, view models, or Room. For my last interview, I was tasked with learning about coroutines and I had to work on a coding challenge to show off my skills. Here's an example of one website I used as part of my research for the coding challenge. You can use any website with official documentation to implement in a coding challenge. For algorithm-based questions, preparing will involve using websites such as LeetCode, and HackerRank to practice your problem-solving skills. As a heads up, many companies will have you add a new feature to their application as part of the challenge. So it's a good idea to make sure that you have used their product. When interviewing for iHeart, for example, I was asked to design a system for organizing songs. For the tech phone screen, it is very important that you are able to discuss your solution. This gives the person interviewing you an idea of your thought process, and it allows them to see how you work through a problem. To stand out in this phase, you must be able to discuss your solution and thought process. If you're able to get through the solution before the interview time is up, they will most likely have you solve a harder question or might ask you to add tests, clean the code, or enhance the UI. You must also be prepared for questions that you might not know the answer to. Instead of saying that you don't know, you can say something such as, I don't have much experience with X technology, but I do know that Y. That way, you're still answering the question and demonstrating your skill set.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Wesnie. Now, these days, you may be doing an on site virtually. So, we wanted to share some tips that can assist you in this relatively new form of interviewing. The goal of this phase is obviously to land the job. So, what can you do? Tailor your response to the interviewer's role. Be personable but professional. Prepare in advance for any technical exercises. Did you know that for over 20% of people interviewed in this survey, they make a hiring decision within the first 1 to 5 minutes of talking to someone? Since that's the case, you really need to make the most of this time and get started off right. One of the best things you can do is tailor your response to the interviewer's role. As you've seen so far, the recruiter has a slightly different goal than the hiring manager. That also differs slightly from the engineer in the tech screen. You want to be able to demonstrate to all of them that you are a good fit because they're going to come back together and share their takeaways on your interview. Now, if you're having the on site virtually, be professional. Make sure your video background is not all busy and distracting. Still dress appropriately, at least up top. You want to show that you're taking this job seriously. Finally, make sure you're prepared for any final technical exercises that you may have to participate in. Often there are whiteboarding exercises, maybe pairing on a tech problem with an engineer on the team. Make sure you ask in advance what the entire process is going to entail so that you're not surprised the day of. Now, what can you do to stand out? Make it a conversation. Ask and answer questions. Provide supporting evidence. Think about three main situations that you can apply to a variety of circumstances that the team may ask you. Keep it positive. If someone says, well, why are you looking? It's always the same answer because I'm looking for new opportunities. Don't bash your old boss. Don't talk about the team. Try to stay positive. And finally, do not harp on the perks. Ask about reimbursements after you have an offer. If you do these things, you'll definitely stand out.
But what if you've been in the industry for a while and you're looking for a senior level or management type position? Then you'll have to approach things slightly different. You'll want to think more about the behavioral aspects of the interviews and then making sure you communicate effectively. For some of you on the call, English might not be your first language. Does that mean that you're out of the running? Of course not. Instead, you'll want to use the STAR method to address the behavioral questions, like tell me about a time when, what's your greatest weakness, etc. And you can do this by preparing in advance. Let's use this example. Tell me about a time when you made a mistake. Brainstorm a few examples of particular scenarios in your previous job and think through how to discuss that scenario using the STAR framework. To answer this question, we'll use this example. I accidentally overwrote my coworker's changes the day before a release. We can use this statement as a situation. Your task would be that you had to get your coworker's changes back. The action could be that you stayed up all night and took a series of get steps to retrieve your coworker's work. And the result would be that you retrieved your coworker's work. So your response would be something like this. There was once a time when I overwrote my coworker's changes when we were working on the same branch. Since the release was the next day, I had to act fast to get the branch back to how it was. I then decided to stay up throughout the night to fix this. And doing this allowed me to get the branch fixed in time for the release.
And that's it. We've actually gone through each stage of the hiring funnel, from resume all the way to onsite. We really hope that you learned at least one thing that will help improve your next job search experience. When you put these techniques into practice, you can definitely look forward to getting hired. Thanks. Okay, so the first question we have, there are companies that ask only lead code style questions for Android engineer roles. What are your thoughts on this approach for interviewing? Wesnie, can I let you take this first one?
Okay. So I feel like the companies that do ask the leak code questions, they're mostly doing it to see like how you would think and how you would solve through a problem. I generally I like the other way of interviewing where you're asked to code through using Android Studio, but there are a lot of companies that will ask leak code questions. So my advice would be to like make sure you're practicing beforehand, just so that you're prepared for it.
Okay, thanks, Wesnie. The next question we have, when you come from a different career, should you leave that in your resume? Oh, that's a great question. Um, so I'll take this one first. I'll say yes, you should leave it in your resume. The reason why is that we are looking for diverse candidates in the tech industry, and there could be something really interesting about your background that would be super applicable for the company. And it also shows that you normally people are like self learners, you can learn quickly. All of those things are really positive and show that you have potential to succeed in a role. Any thoughts on that one?
I also think that you should leave it. Just and I agree. It's mostly because it shows that you took the initiative to like switch your career, and it also shows what you could like a different perspective that you could bring to the company based off of the industry that you were working in.
Yep. Awesome. The next one we have, take home tests can be very annoying or repetitive. How can we approach those so we actually learn something that helps us in the future? What do you think, Wesney?
With those, what I like to do is I'll take a look at like what's new, and if there's something that I don't have much experience working with, I'll try to implement that into the take-home test. That way, when when it's time for the interview, I'm able to talk about it and show that I went from knowing nothing about that technology to actually building something with it. So
Yep.
that's what keeps me engaged and excited.
Awesome. The next question is: the advice about not giving out a salary range first still valid these days? Personally, I don't think so. I feel that as someone in the market, chances are I'm talking to multiple companies. I'm probably still working. I'm busy. I don't have time to go through an entire interview process and then find out at the end it doesn't meet my salary expectations. So I think in the beginning, almost when I talk to a recruiter, I might say, this is what I'm looking for, but then I'll just inflate that range.
Yep,
What do you think, Wesnie?
I do the same exactly.
Okay. And let's see, we still have more time. The next question: any salary negotiation tips? Okay, that last one was sort of a tip. Say your salary range in the beginning, but inflate it 10% or so, maybe 15%, just inflate it. And then the other thing is think about all the other stuff that you want. If they are not willing to agree to your salary, in the end when you're negotiating, I try to ask for other things like, well, can I have 2 more days of vacation? Can I can I have more stock options? Can I have every other Friday off? I mean, whatever is important to you, those are things that I would include, and they're worth something.
And when you inflate like your expected salary, that also gives them a chance to like try to meet you in the middle, so that at the end of the day you're happy with the offer and they are too.
Yep, awesome. The next question: when giving a desired salary, how do you decide where you should be in the range of salary? So one thing Wesney mentioned was the levels.fyi site. You can look and you can find a range for your area, what the salary should look like. Another thing, sometimes I will look on Glassdoor for the position that I'm interested in, and I'll see what a bunch of the salaries were for that same role. Sometimes I'll ask other people, like, hey, you just got this job, willing to share a range with me? I just make sure I get a lot of different data points.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. And I think we can take one more question. What are red flags you look for when talking to a new company? Ooh, this is a juicy one. Wesney, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so one thing I definitely look for is like throughout the interview process, I try to make sure I talk to like more than one person from the team, just so that I can see like how well I could work with that person and see like if it would be a good fit. And if I'm not really interviewing with the team that I'm going to be working with, sometimes that like it in a way it raises a lot of questions in my mind, like you know like I wouldn't know how it would be to work with that team because I haven't spoken to anyone on that team. So that's one thing I look for. And then I also look for whether or not the company invests in allowing the engineers to learn and grow. I usually ask like what are some of the opportunities that the company provides, just to see like if the company is invested in letting like the engineers grow.
Okay, awesome. For me, red flags: when people give me different answers to the same question. I tend to have a set of questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions that I ask every single person. And if I'm interviewing with a company and I get different answers, and that's, for me, that's a potential sign of dysfunction in the organization. And at this point in my career, I wouldn't be interested in being involved with that. So that's something that I definitely look for. I think we maybe have one last minute. I graduated from a coding boot camp. How can I make my resume more competitive? Ooh, nice question. One of the best things that you can do is to put your sample projects and side projects on your resume and then include sort of a bulleted list of what those particular projects include. And as you're applying for jobs, I might tailor my resume for each specific position. So, for example, let's say you worked on 3 projects as part of your boot camp. Then, as you apply to one job, they might really be into coroutines and view models, for example. I may try to call that out under the bullets, whereas maybe another job is interested in something else. Um, I'm not sure when they're going to cut us off, but there was also another question that I thought was great, got a lot of votes. How do you ask for a promotion? Should never be a surprise. That's my answer for that. I talked to my manager about it very consistently so that they should know. And I should also know that this promotion is in my mind and I need it to happen. So what I'll say is what's preventing me from being promoted, and then we'll work towards that during our one-on-ones. So I think what some people do is they assume that they will be promoted, or they assume that their manager knows they're interested in being promoted, and that is rarely ever the case.
Yep.
Okay. Do we do we still have more time? Okay, I'll keep going. Um, how to assess a company culture during the interview process? Okay, what do you think, Wesnie?
Um, I usually, yeah, like going back to like the previous question about like I asked questions basically to see and gauge like how they how the company like has different values. Like before the question about the uh, or the answer that I had about whether or not the company invests in the engineer's growth. Um, I feel like that would be like a type of question to gauge like what is it that the company values, and yeah, I would ask questions similar to that.
Awesome. I also just like to see who are the people that interview me and try to learn a bit more about them. I tend to look people up on LinkedIn when I find out that they might be interviewing me to find out a bit more about their background. Maybe some of them might be public, maybe they're conference speakers or whatever. Like I try to get a feel for the people behind the scenes, and that helps me a bit to assess company culture. Also depends how organized they are with the whole funnel. If communications are getting messed up, or the meetings, some people are always late to the meetings they schedule, whatever it is, I start to feel like maybe this group is a little disorganized, and I don't want to be a part of that. Okay. The next question: while interviewing, how would you know if your manager is good or not? Any specific questions to ask? Okay. What do you say, Wesney?
Um, I would ask questions similar to the slide that Anise talked about, where you would ask about what is their leadership style, and and with that question, you can kind of gauge like, um, does this manager really like contribute to the team? Like are they invested in the needs of the engineers? And yeah, you can from the answer to that question, I feel like you could have an idea of how good of a manager the person is.
Yeah, and I think besides talking to your direct future manager, I also like to talk to the my peers. So I might ask them, what's one thing you wish that our manager did differently? Or what's one area for opportunity in our leadership team or something, to get their perspective as well on what they feel the manager should do better. And then that kind of gives me even more perspective on what I might be dealing with my manager. Okay. Next question: how can I better figure out my level if I am not junior but feel very junior? 1.5 to 2 years of professional experience. Okay. Wesnie, I'll give it to you.
I would say to reach out to your manager during your one-on-ones and maybe ask about like what are the requirements for each level, and then based off of that, you can kind of gauge like where you would be on the different levels.
Yep. Look at a lot of job postings for the role. Like, look at a ton of job postings for junior, for example, Android developers, mid, intermediate, senior staff. And then for yourself, you can kind of create a list of what people are expecting from each level. And then you'll know whether or not you sort of check the boxes for those things. Okay, the next question. Is it okay for a candidate to interview to the final round only to say no at the very end, just to understand the market, team, and what salary they could get? No? I don't know. That seems bad. No, I don't know. What do you think, Westy?
Well, if you have other offers on the table, I think, that is an acceptable way. Um, but I do think it's important to, have the recruiter know like what it is that you want in the position. But if that's like the only role that you're applying for just to see the salary, in a way it's kind of like, I don't know, you would be wasting the company's time. So uh, that would not be a good idea.
Yep. Okay. And our last question. Is it acceptable for promotions only to happen during review and never outside of review process? I'd say it depends on your company. Each company has different rules and policies in place for promotions. So it's up to the company, and it's kind of a tough question to get an answer to during the hiring phase. So that, yeah, the best way might be to reach out to people who currently work there if that's something that's very important to you.
I agree.
Okay, awesome. I think we've covered them all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.